Okay, everybody, welcome back to Techno Social. It's been a little while since we've done an episode, and this is probably going to be one of the first episodes that comes out from the rebooting and the rebranding. We're aiming to have a lot more content coming out, so it's me and Daniel Fraga back this time with my friend Yuri Jukic. I think I've pronounced that well, Jukic, and
That's wrong, but that's
that's
fine.
completely wrong. Well, there we go. And Liam Fitzgerald as well, both of them being involved in the Urbit community. And that's what we're going to be talking and thinking about today a bit is this, as an outsider, it seems like an interesting cult of engineers and coders. But to start off with, how would you guys describe what Urbit is and why is it interesting people?
You want to go ahead as the
Sure.
OG
Um,
here?
I, but like, I think Urbit is interesting for like the reason that it's like one of the most ambitious software engineering like projects ever tried. Like, this is what like brings people in is just like the sheer scope of the ambition of like, and this used to be Urbit's tagline like quite some time ago, is like Urbit is your last computer, right? Like we're trying to build a computer that lasts forever. And so like this requires a certain like philosophy of computing that kind of operates on like an infinite time preference, and that like, yeah, so that it's like resistant to like any change or anything like that. And like that's like the million foot view of Urbit. What Urbit is like practically is a like a program that you run on a computer that allows you to like log in via a website or over a phone app, and that will let you like talk to people and like communicate them with them, and you can like write applications that communicate between Urbits, like between instances of like between people without having any necessary like intermediation. So if I want to talk to Yuri, I talk to Yuri directly. It doesn't go through some like Facebook or Google or whatever server.
Yep, like I want to ask you, why do you think the infinite time preference is important? Why do you want to build a computer that lasts forever?
I mean, for one, just because it sounds like fucking cool, right? Right. Like, this is like it's an extreme like challenge, right? It's like, we take this discipline that changes like every goddamn 6 months, and we like distill it, and like it is almost in some ways like a task of the philosophy of computing. Like, what is the like raw materials that is like required to build something that lasts forever, right? Like abstracting it down to like the bare minimum. Uh, yeah, I mean, I just like, I also think like personally as like a value prop for like other people, and like it's important that our like computing lasts forever, because if our computing like lasts forever, then you can like, it's not like a sort of an operational risk to like fold like computing systems into your like operating environment, like uh so for instance, like, take, one of my pet sort of like angles with this is like uh, implants. And so like things like, wirelessly connected, like, pacemakers and things like that, right? It's like if you build like a computer and like software that can last forever, then like you don't have to worry about, the company that made your pacemaker like dropping support for your pacemaker, and then like, you just like fucking like dead because the fucking pacemaker got like end of life, like things like that. Like it allows to like actually have a considered relationship with technology, because the continuation of using that technology is not dependent on like some corporation's continued profitability, right? Which
Yeah,
is like
you cannot
extremely
get rug
important, I think.
pulled by tech.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. You
So,
like
so
you,
where here is the difference, say, between um, a computing interface or a software owned by a corporation and Urbit?
Also, for one, like Urbit is open source, which means you can read all of the code. It's like it's yours, like, and like you have access to the computer that the Urbit like software runs on, right? Which means you have like visibility into whatever it wants to do. You can like change that code if you would like to. Yeah, like it's yours in a way that like when you go to like twitter.com, you have no control over like the way you use Twitter. You can't like change like any of the like things that are core to the way you use like the way you experience Twitter. It's not for you. It's for the advertisers so they can extract ad money out of you. Right. This is like a very classic like value alignment problem is like if Twitter is beholden to like the advertisers, they make interfaces for the advertisers to drive ad clicks, and they are like very interested in stopping you from changing the way you experience Twitter, because the way you experience Twitter has been engineered for as much ad revenue as possible.
So like we are trying to re-engineer how we experience computers basically. And like one,
well, like, and the fact that the idea that your experience of your computer and your experience with the world really and the like people in it as mediated through computers, like you should define that experience on your terms. This is like it's like more or less like table stakes for like a certain kind of like behavioral sovereignty, right? Because the thing about interfaces is that they are like more or less behavioral training devices, and like who's like the behavior that is produced as a result of you using that interface, like who does that serve? Does it serve you, or does it serve like the advertisers?
It's almost like a behavioral training machine that one wrests control of from the advertisers or the profit motive of others and recruits it for one's own purposes. My question that comes up is, I'm not a coder, could I use Urbit to program my own computing interface without knowing coding? And moreover, would I be able to have a behavioral strategy for myself that I can design in order to use Urbit, or are those things still kind of possible in theory but in development?
Yeah. So the Urbit interface right now is, as it stands, is like reasonably limited because we still use like a web browser to access the Urbit, right? And so it's still constrained and like this prevents us from doing like a lot of the things that, like we would like to do. And like this is the like pet project that I've been working on for like much of this year, is like writing a way for people to like do as you describe. And like I want to be able to like program my interface in some like meaningful way. I want to be able to like rearrange it so that it is mine, and that it, like it has the things that like I need like right and immediately, and so on and so forth.
I think it's useful to clarify here, like that the idea is if you could have a same backend and the same program, and then you could on top of it you say, oh, I want it to look differently, I want it to behave differently, right?
Yeah.
So you would not like the computer would be modular and you would not be stuck with one single way of interacting with it. And so like if you're in Twitter, you're only in Twitter and this is the only way you can interact with it. But if you could design your way of interacting with Twitter with this app, that would be like a big step up.
Well, that reminds me of, I remember reading Justin Murphy writes about Urbit a fair bit. And if I'm getting this right, and I might be getting this wrong, so do correct me if I'm wrong, I think he wrote once about the potential for people building online communities or online businesses that have communities, precisely because the proposition is that you'll be able to pick and choose the things, the interfaces that you want precisely for your community. Whereas at the moment, to give a concrete example, with one of the communities I've been involved with until very recently. It's going through partly through Gmail and partly through Telegram and then partly through Zoom and then partly through informal stuff as well. And all of these applications have a very strong branding and a strong interface that we don't get to choose. And that the idea with something like Urbit would be, say, I'm founding a new community, a Techno-Social Institute community, for example, and I can, okay, here's my chat feature, here's my forum feature, here's my content library, all of it under one hub that I can choose the aesthetic and the flows through it. Is that correct?
I mean, the key feature here is, I agree with everything you said, but the key feature is you own your data. And so there is nobody that can take that away from you. And then on top of that, you can customize your interfaces, customize your interactions and everything else. But the most important thing is like what Justin Murphy says is important for him is the permanence of the community that he grows on Urbit, and that he's not dependent on any other third party, and he doesn't lose it if Facebook goes down or whatever goes down. Because on Urbit, everybody owns their own server. And so whatever community you gather for yourself, this underlying data protocol, like you keep it.
How secure are these servers? Are other Urbit users able to go snooping in the conversations, or are intelligence agencies able to go snooping in the data? Or is it, what's the deal with ownership versus privacy?
So in like privacy from like security angle is like, I have to lay some disclaimers here, which is that like the current way in which Urbit works is that all apps run as like, root or like a super user, like privileged account. So like any application that you can install can more or less read or write any other piece of data from like anywhere else in the Urbit, even if it's from a different application. And so like this is an issue that we like hope to address sometime this year. In fact, like quite rapidly. And then like with that disclaimer out of the way, in theory, like once we have these kinds of safeguards against like malicious applications and so on, Urbit, it still needs a security audit, which it has not received, but like Urbit is actually like easier to secure than a lot of than applications written anywhere else, right? There are like a lot of attack surfaces for like, applications that just don't exist on Urbit because it's like such a radically different way of doing programming. There's, enormous like categories of bugs and security vulnerabilities that just like don't happen. And then to sort of like swivel onto the like privacy point is that, so if you host your like Urbit, if the Urbit runs on a computer that you physically own, which, some people do, they leave like a, like a ThinkPad running in their basement or whatever, and then like access it from there, then that Urbit is secure against like more or less like everything, unless you've got the Mossad like tapping the fuck, like using God knows what to like break into your house and like bug the thing, right? If you run your Urbit, like as many people do, because it is like to run an Urbit yourself can be like slightly tricky, and so many people just like more or less pay somebody else to do it, and so like that person can like still, that person has like more or less the privileges of say Facebook or Twitter in the whole world. Like they can still read all of your stuff. And that's just like it's actually a good compromise because it allows, people who aren't like security paranoid to like, pay somebody else. I don't want to care about it. If you are security paranoid, you can host, like you can have your Urbit at home. And what's important here is that like that doesn't, you can still talk to an Urbit that is hosted like with somebody else or whatever. And so you're not locked out of the entire, like you're not locked out of anybody on Urbit because you choose to host in one place or another. So like everybody can still communicate with each other.
So what's the if I had to ask, the grand political / philosophical project that underlies Urbit and that underlies the participation of its members and of its developer?
Well, I think like grand philosophical project, I mean, is like more or less about, you know, proving like it's a proof by construction that like computing can be solved forever. Like I think is like a big part of like what exactly that sort of like philosophical angle is. I mean, you know, it's a big reason that like drew me towards it. I mean, I can't speak for anyone else, but like this, it's sort of absent, you know, specific people's like, you know, political opinions or whatever, which are not, you know, super coherent on like amongst, you know, urban developers. Yeah, it's like this is a sort of one grand thing. It's like that like mega maniacal sort of like we can fix it like for all of time, right? And the kind of like I don't know philosophy that would entail.
Yeah, and there's like a bunch of different types of people in Urbit. So it's hard to find something that keeps them together except the technology itself. So the political views I feel like are like all converge on this, like this is how computers should work, and there's traditional Catholics and there's like people who don't care about anything, and there's everything in between, and like everybody just likes it because of the tech, which is like really, really cool.
Do you see any potential for Urbit to serve as the platform where crazy, wacky, weirdo communities can take hold and do something strange? Would you imagine some cool folks running a cult, running some kind of revolution, insurrection, art movement?
That's the point,
right? Okay, tell me about that.
Yeah,
I mean, like there's this whole thing with I'm not super familiar with it, but with Discord, and there was like a DAO, which is a decentralized autonomous organization, which like got like pretty big on Discord and like influential, and then like Discord cut it, right? Because they were able to exert some influence on the world, which was not approved by the authorities, who then didn't want, you know, Discord server to host them. And but if you're running your own cult, you're running your own server. And so like the government cannot exert pressure on like a big company to remove you from their server because you're owning your own server. And like for all we care, like ISIS can own their own server, right? And like as far as I can tell, like there's a bunch of websites and governments do nothing about them because people own them. And so like if you own your own Urbit and your community owns it, like nobody else is like helping you do your thing. And so you are like there's no dependencies on which you depend to like exert political influence except your own server. And of course then it's your responsibility to be in good terms with the government or whatever, and to maintain like defensibility of your servers, of your Urbit.
I'm on the Urbit website right now. It says there's a roadmap to mass adoption. I find that interesting. Like, what would be the communities built around? Like, who are the essential people to build these places? What communities might form around them? I mean, right now, Liam, right? You're in El Salvador with, I guess, a bunch of other Urbit folks, right?
yes.
How do the communities that form around Urbit look like today, and what might they look like in the future?
So, you know, a overwhelming majority of like Urbit, of like, you know, so extant Urbit communities are, you know, communities that work on like Urbit itself. It has this like, you know, kind of grading like circularity to it. Like Urbit exists so that you can talk to other people to continue to develop on Urbit. And like this, like, you know, like we need to make it like more viable for other people to like use Urbit and to like be able to, communicate with each other. But like, I think where this like fundamentally goes is like, because of the way in which like Urbit's like data structures are kind of because of the way in which like Urbit's data structures like have like names, and the way you can reference those names, like to talk about like data in like a different cult, right? It's like you're not talking about like the classic idea of an Urbit, like of a cult, like on Urbit, say like 5 years from now. What you're actually more talking about is like a decentralized like conspiracy of cults, none of which have like clear boundaries like between each other, because the way in which like Urbit allows users to relate to data and to reference that data and like to do all of these things, and also in like a private way, means that it's like you end up with like structures of cults that I think would be very difficult to sort of like untangle, to give any clear like delineation between, is this cult like separate to this cult? Is it an op and like a front for this other cult? Like it would, I think you would end up with like very interesting, like, decentralized conspiracies.
Right. So it seems like the end goal, or one of the end goals, might be to then create this infrastructure on which cults can be developed, which in turn affords cults to not be necessarily limited things, but just a bunch of decentralized, interesting shapes and forms of cults.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And so like, there's like, it allows for a whole bunch of things, like, including like sort of like mimetic warfare of cults, like, and like allowing for like an actual connectivity, and like a connectivity that means something and that is like interactable with, and that renders the like, it renders the like the internet and the way people relate to computers and like networked computers as not like a series of like kind of compartments that like, very much typifies the way people think about like, current web technology, but like as just like a infinite like mesh of like things connecting to other things, and like with like a lot less sort of issues traversing, like rendering that whole idea of computers as more of a space and less of a series of compartments, and like a space that can be moved around and like thought upon.
Do you think we're going to have an event in the future that's going to precipitate the adoption of Urbit?
I mean, I think, there are like a series of, a series of events that I can imagine that would like drive the need for, like for Urbit and for like Urbit user demand. So like, one of these is like the classic like cryptocurrency angle, which is like more or less that, like DAOs, dev shops, like all these kinds of things, these like entities, right? These kind of like, DAO is more or less a crypto cult. And so like, basically they have, special status as a cult, because, under US government law, the like Discord could lean on, the US government could lean on Discord to like deplatform them, right? And so like, if a lot of like crypto crackdown stuff continues, then I would not be surprised if like people just get like removed en masse from Discord, for like, crypto related stuff. And then there's this whole thing of like, oh, now we have to move to like a different platform, and like ideally Urbit will be best situated to pick up that that notion.
I think that's interesting strategically, because level one of this kind of transition might be the kind of the mass cancellations of YouTube and folks moving to like Rumble or whatever, precisely because they represent the cultural shift, cultural insurrection. And it feels like Urbit might be a level 2 of that reinvents computing in order to house these different aspects of an insurrection, right? Now, Urbit sounds to me like techno preppers, creating the infrastructure that will survive the apocalypse, and you're able to sustain whatever community wants to build itself in its means. And is there any point of view that you guys have with regards to the rapid advance of generative AI? What are the thoughts that come up to connecting Urbit and generative AI?
So like the way I think about generative AI is like, you know, GPT-4 is ridiculously useful. Like, and like it's only going to get better. Like, you know, Basilisk Code, so on, so forth. The thing is, when you use, you know, generative AI to create software, you want more or less like as little space for the AI to, you know, potentially, you know, like, so when you like generate like a lot of code, you invariably have to tweak it. And like, I don't think this will get that much better, you know, like going down like in the future. And it also creates like, you know, difficulty for the AI when like it rewrites things, and like it's more compute, right? And so like whatever it is from the generative AI perspective is like the way an like AI can write applications that is like hyper legible like to that AI, and that like because Urbit applications are so short and they don't require like a lot of effort, it's like incredibly easy for, you know, Urbit applications to be like AI generated, and for the AI like to not screw that up, and for it to not like, you know, break in unexpected ways. This is the general like software engineering concern,
right,
with like generative AI being used towards software, is that you're going to end up with this like this pile of mud that like nobody knows how it works, and you just have to like consult the AI, and the like entire field of software ends up as something more of a priestly occupation than an engineering occupation. It's like, oh, consult the great like computational rack and like get it to fix the thing. And so like what's sort of important for me at least is that, you know, in order for AI to build like complex applications, that it doesn't have to like write a lot of code. And so what that means for me is like providing a good set of like foundational primitives that you can build, like that the AI can build on. And so that like if we have these like foundational primitives like set and done, then like the AI has like more creativity. It works more often of the time. It works with less compute. It's like it's a force multiplier for like generative AI in some sense.
right. So and that connects to this. So rumor has it that Apple's going to build, or rather going to launch, or rather that part of its new products, rumor has it, is the ability to run large language models on the computer itself as opposed to on a server, because every MacBook has kind of a chip that is enabled, like some kind of specific chip that enables it basically to run an LLM on the computer itself. What's the relationship between Urbit and what is most commonly known as edge computing, that you just run stuff locally? Does it overlap, or am I missing something here?
Yeah. So right now, like Urbit is like you typically access your Urbit remotely. So like I have like a box in like, you know, I like host a box in my friend's house, and like when I access my Urbit, I open a web page that like then accesses that web page that's hosted in my like friend's house. And so the way Urbit does edge computing is it does not do edge computing at all, like as it stands now. But there are like ways in which Urbit could be brought to like do web computing, and there are a number of like different angles for like edge computing that, you know, you could that and people are trying. It's just that like none of them have been sort of like have borne fruit yet.
Got it.
So what's edge computing?
As far as I know, it's this idea they can run stuff locally on the actual device without having to make calls to some server.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I mean, it's also worth noting that like edge computing is not as important in an Urbit world because one of the big things of Urbit is of edge computing is that it's your device. So like, you can have sort of like private information on there that you don't have to like trust to like third parties. But if it's an Urbit, then like you own that computer. It's like you don't have to worry about edge computing from like the privacy angle or from the like, data sovereignty angle, because it's still your computer. It's just a computer that lives somewhere else.
Got it. Yeah.
The relationship is redefined, right? The data is divorced from apps, and the data lives on your Urbit, and then apps can come and use that data. But this is as opposed to the usual model that we have now, is that the data lives somewhere else and the apps are coupled to this data, right? And so like if I have an app, I cannot run it on the data that I have on Facebook, because it's like literally impossible for me to get the data that Facebook has on me. But if I have my own data on my Urbit, then like I can use a bunch of different algorithms to run on this data, and I preserve privacy because they all run on where I keep it, right? And so like nobody can access things which I don't allow them to.
So that goes back to a moment ago, Liam, you made the comparison with Discord. So with Discord, there's a central Discord team that the government can call up and basically pressure them. Whereas Urbit has, well, here's the thing, and maybe it's still not completely clear in my head. So Urbit must have a central team. I mean, somebody's built the fucking website, to put it really crudely. I guess there's some kind of structure around the thing, but the idea would be that the US government or any other government wouldn't be able to call up Urbit HQ and say, you need to do this about these guys.
Yeah, because they're not keeping the data, right? They're keeping the code, but the data, every person keeps data on their own Urbit.
But could they be pressured into withdrawing the code? Or is it that the open source solves that problem?
Yeah, so it's like open source, right? And so, despite its many failings, America still has like reasonable speech protections, and it's reasonably well established that like code is like a valid form of speech. And so things would have to get like particularly nasty, and before, that whole like, forcing the like developers to push code, like malicious code updates, so that the US government could like snoop in on all this stuff. I mean, the other thing is that all the code is like can be like is readable, right? And so a reasonably technically proficient user would know if the Urbit like team had sort of like betrayed everyone's trust and built in this like US government backdoor or whatever. And so like more or less, if like there are ways to basically like trustlessly, host the code that prevents like more or less any one layer from like, preventing it. It's sort of like, it's kind of like a constructed fake bureaucracy where it's like, if they go to any one particular member, it's like, hey, I don't release the thing, I just do X. You might want this guy. And then like, it's just sort of like, nobody is actually at fault. Like nobody like is actually doing the one thing that is like legally considered to be like publishing the thing. So like, there's no way. And if you have enough of those, like, nodes in the chain, like hosted like in, relatively independent jurisdictions, then the like probability that like, they can more or less lean on the entire like Urbit team to push malicious code is like basically zero, as I see it.
Like that's a fun way to think about it. But like if a US government wanted to crack down on it, like I don't think it wouldn't be able to like crack down on like 30 or 100 devs around the world. I don't find that
exactly
feasible.
right.
like they
Yeah,
could lean on them,
absolutely.
but the code is like readable enough, and it will survive sort of in people's computers all over the world. And it hopefully, if Urbit's spiritual mission is strong enough, it would get resurrected in some way.
What is the internal corporate structure of Urbit like then?
Also, Urbit is like not a company per se. It's like an ecosystem, right? So you have a variety of companies attempting to build products on Urbit, and then so like the Urbit core project is like stewarded by this thing called the Urbit Foundation, and it's like their responsibility to develop the core piece of Urbit that all other companies like depend on. And then a lot of the other companies produce things like the chat application. They offer like services so that you can host an Urbit for like you can pay them to like host your Urbit for you, and they like produce a whole bunch of other apps. So it's like it's at this point an ecosystem as opposed to like one company just doing things.
I mean, Urbit also has a very fun history. It started in 2002, I think, right? Is it something like this?
Yeah. I think that's the right idea.
Yeah, Curtis Yarvin started coding, and like it's ridiculous how it took, like, I mean, it's not ridiculous, it's amazing how it took 20 years to build like this small of a system, because it's like they wanted to like shrink it and shrink it and shrink it to make it perfect and make it work amazing. And there's I'm ranting at this point, but there's like the naming of companies that work on Urbit. There's fun trivia behind that, because the company that originally worked on Urbit is called Tlon, and it comes from the story of Jorge Luis Borges, Tlon, Akbar, and Orbis Tertius. And Tlon is this like a land, like a country or something in this story, where it's run by perfect idealism, whereby when you think something, it happens. And is it something like this?
Yeah, it's like this. And
it maps to like how Tlon was originally working on Urbit core, and basically like it maps like how thinking something into existence with like building the right abstractions for Urbit.
That's interesting.
And then there's Akbar, which is a company on Urbit, which is building like an execution layer for a blockchain. Yeah. And
index,
and Akbar is the unknown land basically in this story. And so Akbar, the company, is building an unknown land which is to be explored on Urbit.
Yeah, it's fascinating that they're invoking the gods of Borges. I noticed that quite a while ago, and Borges is a fucking wonderful, deeply esoteric as well.
Yeah. I mean, like you read a lot of the like initial proposals for like Urbit, like the extremely early blog posts that dates a lot from like 2010, and it's fascinating because like the entire idea on Urbit is like predicated on this like Borgesian like series of like counterfactuals that like you kind of like he just sort of like throws at you one after the other, and you're like, wait, where is this going? And then like you finally get to like, oh, this is like how like this is an actually new model of computing that could actually work and that could potentially like last forever, right? Like he uses the example like so Urbit is often called like Martian computing, and Martian computing comes from this like entire like counterfactual idea of like, well, we have this the society of the Martians, and they've been living for like 1 million years, right? So, and at some point, if they have like software, anything that's like what we have now, they basically, or at some point like like, fuck it, we have to like throw the entire thing away and rebuild it. And then so they like throw it away, they rebuild it, and then either it lasts forever or it turns into like another big ball of mud, which then has to be thrown away and rebuilt, right? And so like at the limit, the idea is that like if you give the Martians like 1,000,000 years to like continually like throw out their own code and rebuild it, and throw out their own code and rebuild it, if you give them this, then they eventually end up with Urbit, right? And like Urbit is like Curtis's attempt to describe what like that like Martian computing like would look like, right? And so it's like so like, you know, the entire like framing and pitch of Urbit has this sort of like deeply Borgesian. It's like the world's most elaborate like Borges fan fiction, if you would like yeah. There's something about Urbit that is like is deeply indebted to the spirit of it.
That's amazing. I love like despite the fact that Borges is writing in the 20th century, way before our time, his ideas fit very nicely today. There's another of his stories called The Library of Babel that I remember was on my mind loads in my brief stint where I was working in a tech company working on data. The basic concept of that story is that the entire universe is a library of just repeating rooms with books, and they all look the same. But the people who live there have lost the key to the library. And so they're condemned to just wandering through the halls, looking for the book that explains how the library works. And there's something in that is a vision of a world of infinite data, but no algorithm to search it.
Yeah, and this is like really interesting because it is deeply reflective of like we have like more data than ever, but like the meeting drought has never been worse, right? And like the way in which you get meaning is that like it's in like an inherently sort of like multi-dimensional sort of like you need to be pulling in data from like a lot of places in order to like get any meaningful like observations about the data. And because so much of everyone's data is in all these different little like computers that don't talk to each other, that like it's like really hard to like actually get the computer to like construct meaning for you or to like suggest things based on like the data that you have but that you can't draw any meaning from. Like the classic example of this is like things like health applications, which have like you might have like an Apple Watch, and then like you have like a series of like blood tests, and then like you're like tracking how much you eat on a different app, and so on and so forth. And like because all of these things like exist just on different computers that don't talk to each other, that like you aren't able to like pull all of these things like into the one application and like derive any actual meaning from it. You're just left sort of like flicking from window to window, being like, is that much up there? Like it's not tractable for you to like pull meaning out until you can like put your data and recombine it in ways that like you want, which is like again one of the like sort of core premises of it.
I mean, Fraga, this ties into your project, right?
Precisely, having a lens with which to read data in a project in order to apply it into. And if you have the computing platform that allows you to interface and access that quickly, that would be the great substrate in my project, the dashboard of your dreams that then you could give me, and I'll do some cool stuff with them.
Yeah, I mean, it's also interesting because like this has like fundamentally different privacy implications because it's on Urbit and it's on like your computer, right? Like the idea of like putting all of your health data on like one service is like kind of terrifying because like that's if they could like more or less reconstruct like quite a significant amount of detail about your life just by like analyzing all of that stuff. But if it's all in like your Urbit, then nobody else can see it. And so like it changes the way in which like we feel like sort of paranoid about our data, and the like removes like that kind of, impotence into like, like folding like technological ways of being into our daily existence.
It has privacy implications for sure.
Yeah.
The forever part, why is Urbit better poised to address the project of building the eternal computer than, say, any other service system or server-based system?
So the way we'd like think about Urbit is that like, so Urbit is versioned like what we call like Kelvin versioned, right? Which means that, each component of, so Urbit is like a series of pieces like sitting on top of each other. And each one of those pieces has a like Kelvin version, which is to say like a version number. But the thing about Kelvin versions is that they count down to 0. And once they hit 0, they cannot be changed. And so what you end up seeing is that it has this sort of like, and this Kelvin versioning is like imbues the entire project with like a definitive telos. It's not like, oh, like we might get there and like we might be able to like freeze and like crystallize it forever, right? But you could say that, but it's like there's no sort of commitment like from the developers that this will happen. It's like the way Urbit works is that either like, and we have like set this up explicitly, like either we finish, we can freeze it forever and it lasts forever, or we fail. Like that's it. Like it sets up an explicit failure case. Like it's embedded like deeply into the engineering culture of the Urbit project that like things like must be able to freeze forever. And like this orientation like is one of the things that like allows us to like actually think about such a terrifying project in like a meaningful way. And then the other part is of course like the fact that Urbit's like the way Urbit thinks about computing, like its specification for the actual computations that it does, it fits on like a single shirt. And so that specification like of computing then leads to like an extremely, because that specification of computing is so simple, that then leads to an extremely simple like way in which thinking, like the way in which like to think about like the broader like the layers above that. And so it's like simplicity all the way down. And like that, there's less code, it's simpler, and like we have an orientation that we are going to do this and that it will be finished is like, I think why, like what sets Urbit apart from like, any other project that might, claim to be a quote unquote forever computer.
Something that I'd like to explore a little bit is at the intersection of, say, the vision of Urbit and decentralization and ownership and so on, with actually Curtis Yarvin's political writings, where he seems to be quite pro-monarchism and extreme centralization. And what I almost wonder, what is the overlap, say, between the present Urbit communities of today and the political writings of Curtis Yarvin, if any?
I mean, there's like, still like quite a significant amount of people that like found their way to Urbit, like, like through Curtis's like writings or so on and so forth. As for like squaring the two, I mean, there's like Urbit does in like, some ways feel like a very like sort of courtesy design, because there's this like principle of like Curtis's like political thought, like there's more along the lines of like enforce enforce rule in order to like simplify like the system, right? And so this pops up, then this often pops up as a critique of Urbit, and like, oh, it's like hierarchical, it's like feudal, because like the way in which like an Urbit works is that your Urbit talks to like a parent, and that parent talks to another parent, and so you end up with this like hierarchy of Urbits. But it turns out that like a lot of the reasons that like you would want to do this are actually like kind of like isomorphic to like they actually make the entire idea of like decentralization easier by like not abhorring like some kind of like hierarchy in order to like make things tractable, and then building decentralization on top of that. And like as long as you can like limit the trust of that hierarchy and prevent it from like acting maliciously, then like you're more or less safe.
Is Yarvin still actively involved in the project, or did he step away?
No, he stepped away in 2019.
Okay. Yeah, I just wonder. I'm interested because I really enjoy reading his writings. I a bit challenged by the idea of having a single monarch running things, but it does make me think. I think he has written about the value of having a very strong central authority that controls certain essentials, and then actually allowing as much freedom as possible to all of the other areas that aren't under the direct mitt of the central authority. So this is where
and like
he ends up being quite against a lot of the mainstream progressive leftist thinking, which wants to enforce certain cultural values very strictly, except these people do these rituals. Whereas the Yarvinite proposition would be, I suppose, no, the monarch is going to handle defense and is going to handle certain engineering or, I guess, industrial budgets, but then different communities, different cults, different cultures, do your own things, including having your conflict between each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And so like, this is a design that like, it smells of Urbit in like a couple of ways. It's like, okay, you have the like one, the like a central operating system. That's one thing that like everyone agrees on. And then like it is enforced like sort of, by virtue of its standing. And then like, everyone can like build on top of that. Like they don't have to like worry themselves about like, the nature of the operating system, or like, the nature of like the leadership, or like so on and so forth. And like in some ways you're like more free to write like software on Urbit because you don't have to like worry about, fundamental like underlying primitives that the operating system, like that Urbit, because Urbit already gives you those primitives. And in like many of the same ways, like, under like, Yarvinite lines of like, some of the sketches of like Yarvin stuff, it's like you don't have to worry so much about, like you're more free culturally because like the whole idea of like politics is like, a non-issue and a foregone conclusion. It's it has this like sort of, I don't know, like free energy, like minimization sort of like feel to the like entire sort of concept. Like what's the most amount of order you can establish with the least amount of effort?
What are the Urbit parties like?
I mean, I don't get out to like as much of the Urbit parties as I should. I mean, there are like there's obviously like the Mars Review of Books in New York, which I've been to like, a couple of their parties. They're fun. Assembly is good. I mean, it's kind of interesting because of like Urbit has a bunch of like kind of groups that often have like very differing attitudes towards parties, right? And so yeah, it ends up being like quite an interesting time if like a little self-selected for.
You get everybody from the Puritans to the sex cultists and the fucking psychonauts all in their little bits.
Yeah. All like pumped into the same room. It's quite interesting. I don't think you won't find other like sort of diversity characters and many other like places.
And that many men.
Yeah, and that many men. I mean, it was always the elephant in the room there, but yeah.
And have you you're living in El Salvador, working with other Urbit dudes?
Yeah, like working with like other Urbit dudes. I mean, yeah, I think obviously, El Salvador has like a bunch of like extremely like pro crypto and like crypto friendly like legislation. You can off ramp from crypto like really easy here. So there are ATMs everywhere that like allow you to just transfer in Bitcoin and like get US dollars. So like it's just easy, and like the surf is really nice, which is much appreciated.
And what are you working on exactly right now?
So I'm working on like native interfaces for Urbit. So like I said earlier, like the way in which you access Urbits is like through a web browser. And like I like personally like hate this for a variety of reasons. Like one of which is like, I used to work writing applications for web browsers and I fucking hate it. It sucks. And like, for two, there's a lot of things that Urbit would let you do if we weren't using JavaScript and like the web, like Google Chrome to like render our stuff. And so, yeah, my sort of big grand plan for like the last couple of months has been like writing like a way for like interfaces to be like truly native to Urbit. And so that like that'll like will allow the user to like choose the way in which their interface feels, and that like they can do like what they want. It's their interface, like fundamentally, like because it's again one of the issues of like the JavaScript model is that you can't sort of play with it, or it's not really like amenable to being like toyed with in any way. And so like it's more about like bringing the value prop of Urbit like into the interface, because it doesn't exist in the interface like quite as much yet. So yeah, and like we were talking about the like idea of like reading data from like other places, and like Urbit, not Urbit, like the way we do JavaScript like interfaces right now doesn't deal with like getting data from a whole bunch of different places super well right now. And so yeah, I basically like want to fix all of these like problems. I think I'm getting close to being like at a point where I can like start like showing people like what I've done. But what I think is like nice about this entire thing is that it constructs like interfaces that are allowed to have like consistent branding, right? So like you were talking about like having like a techno-social institute like community, and like with these like interface constructions, you would be able to like give the like techno-social institute a like consistent like branding, a consistent feel. You would be able to customize it so like that your group feels the way like you want it to, instead of it being like a hodgepodge of like Discord and like Google Docs and like whatever.
How accessible is it right now? Because I remember Yuri and I had a conversation, and a few others had a conversation, I think back in December, about Urbit and its possibilities for a community that we were part of then, the same one I mentioned earlier, that I'm not involved with anymore, and some other people have left. But I suppose my slight skepticism at that time was just what would be the work investment to get our current sort of patched together but working enough infrastructure of Gmail and Telegram over onto the Urbit servers and get the whole community over into the servers as well. Is it cost effective in terms of time and labor? And I don't even know if it costs anything financially as well. Is it effective yet? Or because I guess my interest at the moment in Urbit seems to be like I've got my eye on it at the edge, because it seems like in a few years it could be something that's really interesting and exciting.
I mean, it depends on like, what your current, like suite of like applications is. If those apps are like, relatively, relatively common, like chats or like, a like collection of like links or like, documents or whatever, then like, yeah, more than likely, like Urbit. So like there are companies coming out with like basically free hosting so that it costs nothing to have an Urbit. Yeah, so like that is all, and so like the overall like friction is more or less like going to zero, like very quickly, actually, a lot quicker than I thought it would be. And yeah, this makes like onboarding like an entire community a lot more of a like trivial task than it like has been in the past. But yeah, it depends, I think, more or less entirely on like what you need out of Urbit, and like, do we have those applications yet? If we don't have those applications yet, we'll probably have them in like a year or so.
Yeah. Like, is there anything that I could do on it right now that I can't do with the more obvious mainstream applications, other than the owning the code and the privacy implications?
So it's not about like, I wouldn't like necessarily frame it as what you can or can't do. It's more a question of like, how like easy is it to do those things? So like, for example, there's a classic example of token gated like discords, right? It's like, oh, you have to own like certain crypto thing to like be allowed into the Discord, right? And so the way this works in practice is like absolutely like mind-blowingly awful. Like you have to like join the Discord, and then like they put you in like a single room, like a single channel, and they like ask you to click on a link. You click on the link, and then it goes to like, you have to sign like an attestation, that like a proof of ownership that I own this thing. And then you take it, and then it goes back to the Discord, and it says, hey, like click on this thing. Like in the Urbit world, like composing and like and putting together like different ideas like that is a lot easier, right? And you could like theoretically do all of this in like one step, like join the like go click join like that group, that community, and it would like automatically check if you had the thing. It would prompt you to say like, hey, we're trying to get like a proof of ownership out of you, like yes, in, and then you're just in, right? And it's like reducing the amount of friction that is involved in like putting like different pieces of an ecosystem together is like what makes that ecosystem like kind of, and what makes that community sort of like feel like alive and real and like homogenous in some sense.
The question of membranes, and it greatly improves the ability of flows to move across membranes, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like, and so yeah, there's a lot like more like permeability, and so it's easier to like funnel data like in and out while like still remaining like giving total control over it.
Are there any other core points to hit, and either of you guys think, before we move towards wrapping this up?
I think it's incredibly fun, just like going and exploring it, because up until now it was reasonably high friction to get in there. And so the people who managed to get in there are interesting people. And so exploring the groups that are on Urbit is really fun, and like would recommend.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, yeah. And this sort of like fun kind of has this weird angle of like, it pervades from like, you know, actually like doing the programming is like quite enjoyable. It's like, you know, 2 or 3 times more enjoyable than like most other languages that you work in. And like this kind of like sort of the general like fun of Urbit like kind of telescopes like all its way like through the like, you know, applications and then like into the communities. Like it's like, you know, it's highly enjoyable. It's never been easier to get onto Urbit. And like, you know, there's a lot of interesting sort of, yeah, interesting things going on.
Well, nice. I mean, this could actually be a nice place to wrap it up then. This has been a lot of fun and very interesting. Like I said, I've got my eye on the Urbit world, sort of from the sidelines, and I imagine I will remain on the sidelines for somewhat longer, although who knows. But it's it definitely, thinking medium term, it seems like something that's worth potentially moving towards. Or at least, I guess the other thing, right, is now I'm just freeballing. There might come a time where, as someone with a community or a company, you hire someone as an Urbit engineer to be like, handle my Urbit side of things.
Yeah.
I mean, that's definitely like a use case. It's like I could see like a lot of demand for, especially given things like, you know, porting all of your current data over, which, you know, that don't exist. A great lot of tools for like stuff like this.
It's like ideally if, you know, your coders were like plumbers who come and fix something or come and install something in your house, and it's done, rather than like subscribing to a service or whatever.
Yeah, so I just call you and be like, right, Jurij, get me onto Urbit.
Yeah.
Check.
Yeah, like I want this thing and I want this to look like this, and you know, I want this feature where I can click on this and then my people can see this thing, and what they vote on is surfaced and sent to the internet, and this is our community newsletter and all of these things. And then you can just like hire a coder for a bit of money and they can code this entire thing up for you because their Urbit primitive is so great.
So it's like a platform for digital architecture, really.
Yeah.
Great. Daniel, any other last thoughts, man?
I think we've covered everything. It's the techno preppers waiting for the disaster to arrive. And for like you, I also think that at some point it's such my feeling is that the proposition is so, I'm going to say niche, but in a good way, that I feel like it's perfectly poised to react to some kind of massive event that makes people want to migrate towards sort of more local based computing. And I think that as a strategic thing, it holds that potential. And from the sidelines as well, I'm keeping my eyes open.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I never thought of it like as a defense. I was just like, it's awesome and I'm doing it and that's it.
Keep building. One day they will come.
Makes me think there's the Marshall McLuhan line, right? That World War III is a guerrilla information war where everyone is a participant.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, Urbit will become, in like, you know, in such a like scenario, like as it unfolds, like will become like more and more like pressingly needed.
Amazing. Well, guys, let's
Right.
draw a wrap here. If there's ever an Urbit party happening in Europe, give us an invite. I'd love to come.
All right, for sure.
There will be, definitely.
All right.
That's good, gents.
Take care, guys. Thank you for your time, both of you. And
All right.
enjoy the surfing, Liam.
Have a good one.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Ciao.